All right, so you can see my beautiful picture that when it was sunny and I was not tired. So I'm very happy to be here today with Matt on this session. Thank you for having us. Thank you for inviting us. This topic today will be backup and restore and best practices on large data volume. There will be also a quiz towards the end of the session, so be ready. There are prizes to be won, so pay attention to everything that we're going to say, because it's going to help you.
Numbers, maybe write those numbers down. That might be a clue. That might help.
I'm only saying that so they'll pay attention to what we're going to say, you know. All right, confidentiality and disclaimer, and you're all used to that type of disclaimer. So let's first review what are the considerations for backup and restore, which is today's topic, especially for large data volume. So why do we need to back up Salesforce org? What does it mean to create a data backup for Salesforce org? What are the additional considerations you need to have in mind when you are dealing with large data volume? What are the objectives that you have when restoring the data? How should you design, how should you architect your org to be restore ready? And what are the side effects of restoring data to a Salesforce org? And finally, what are the limits and constraints that I need to consider? All those questions throughout the presentation will be answered. Today's agenda is going to be backup and large data volume that will be presented by Matt. Then I would go on to present the restore and large data volume. See what do we mean by restore? Is it the same as data? Like, is there a data transformation when you're doing the restore? And if there is, what are those transformations? And finally, how to monitor governor limits. We would then go back to Matt, who is going to be leading the quiz and work his magic. So, Matt.
Yeah, magic. We'll see about that. But yeah, I mean, you know, when I first joined the ODA server, it was really quite fascinating to me as somebody who's been around Salesforce for a while about some of the details around what we're about to talk about. So I hope you find it as interesting as I have. So let's start with the bad news. If you go to the next slide, Siham. So why do we want to back up? Well, when people talk about backup, they normally sort of think things about disaster recovery, something really bad and dramatic. So, you know, we're in the cloud, we're a SaaS when we're Salesforce. So, you know, all our data is in somebody else's data center. Could something happen to that data center? Potentially, but very, very rarely. You know, the news article I could find really was a data center that was under construction. So, you know, we certainly have never had anything like that, you know, from a Salesforce data center. But those of you who've been around for a while might remember a 21-year history, but not too many. Again, they always make the headlines, and they're pretty serious when they happen. Site switch that was causing problem, and permission getting a couple of years ago that some of you might remember, where the metadata got corrupted for a number of people's orgs, and therefore people were seeing the wrong data, and that's just as drastic as losing data. But like I say, these are rare. The real common situations with much more mundane. So see if you recognize any of these. It's really much more run-of-the-mill when it comes to having a backup, saving you, you know, day to day. So a user leaving a company and perhaps being slightly upset and deleting some data, or if there's been an accident and somebody's updated a number of records, not just one record, but the real work comes when somebody mass updates some information incorrectly. If you have a backup, then at least you've got a chance of repairing that damage. Likewise, those of us who are administrators, I'm the administrator of our org at Odaseva. If you run a data migration and whoops, wasn't having a good day, might be good to have a backup then as well. When it comes to our users, maybe we've got a power user in our one of our sales ops team that merges accounts incorrectly, or maybe somebody who merges cases incorrectly, or if we have a third-party integration that runs away. I can confess that's happened to me, where we've had DocuSign gone wrong, or some other integration that's kind of run away. How do we get back to where we were? If we had a backup, then at least we've got a chance. So hopefully you will recognize some of these, not too many, but you will recognize many of these, I'm sure. So Siham, what's the impact of data loss?
Well, according to the Ponemon Institute and Data Breach Report of 2018, the loss of one record is on average $148, which and that's just an average. So yeah, losing data can be quite expensive indeed.
And you're talking there not only about the downtime or the disruption for the company, but also the internal resources that you've got to get together to fix that. So it is possible to put a price on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to continue on those ones, or do you want me to take those away?
You have your analogy, which I really liked.
You like it?
About this one.
Yeah.
I should say to people as we freestyle our way through this presentation, Siham and I first did this presentation at Dreamforce the other year to a big crowd of people, which was a lot of fun, and we certainly freestyled it then. So it's not the first time.
True.
We all know slides.
Very true. So, I mean, the idea and the analogy that I tend to use when backing up data on large data volume is imagine yourself taking a picture with a family or friends, and you have a couple of people, different ages, and they're talking to each other, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, let's take a picture, and nobody's focusing, nobody's looking at the lens, and everybody's talking and moving around, and you're trying to get them still. And that's what you're going to try to do when you're backing up data on a SaaS environment. Data is never going to be still. Users might be online, especially if you have an international company going on. And you need to capture the data and to have data integrity, to be able to capture large data volume, you need to be as efficient, as quick as possible, and you need to put all the chances on your side by using a couple of methods. And we are going to now discover what those methods are, basically. So, Matt, do you want to illustrate this one?
Sure. So let's start with the most common problem that we're having. So let's think about a fairly simple backup just with accounts and contacts. And I'm really emphasizing here, this is really about large data volumes, and that's always a point of debate as to what that might be in Salesforce. But we're certainly talking about hundreds of thousands of records, because that's going to take more time, and really time is our enemy, as we'll see in this example. If you've got smaller numbers, the potential for this to happen is still there, but it's less likely to happen. But let's talk about this example. So we've got a timeline here, and we're going to run a simple backup of our accounts and contacts. And this is going to start at midnight on the 10th of February. So that's the first date stamp that's in our that's on the left of our timeline there. Now, those of you that have used perhaps something like Data Loader to extract data from Salesforce will be familiar with what I'm about to talk about. And when you run a backup, it's exactly the same. So the first thing that's going to need to happen is you're going to need to select the records for backup. So this is all done through standard Salesforce APIs. And so we're going to need to say in a SOQL query, select the fields that I'm interested in from the object that I'm interested in with whatever conditions that I might want to add optionally. And that then is going to go away. And in our example here, that's the first arrow. It takes about 5 minutes to work out what are the records that need to be included in this extract. And then when that's completed, we're then 5 minutes into this backup running, and it's going to then begin to transfer that across the network down to the machine that's made the request. So if we take the data loader example, those of you who know who've run data loader before, you'll say, what's the object and the records you want to extract? You'll then wait a while and then they'll appear on your machine. So there's been the process of selecting them and then the process of extracting and downloading them. And depending on the speed of your network connection, that's going to take an amount of time to do that. Now, in our example, something happens in the middle of that. Something happens at 7 minutes past midnight that we weren't planning for, and we will come back to what that is in a minute. But for right now, that download completes, and we've now got our selection of account records safely on our computer, and we now want to back up the contact records that go along with those. The process is going to repeat again. The query is going to say which records need to be extracted, and then they're going to be downloaded across the wire. And so each of those steps is going to take 5 minutes each. And so 20 minutes past midnight, 20 minutes after our backup was requested, it's completed, and we think we're done, but we're not. So,
but we're not. Boom, boom, boom.
Put the slide up, Siham, and let's find out what happened. So halfway through our extract of those account records, our users are still in the system, right? This is a SaaS application. People buy Salesforce because they can let people in from wherever in the world at whatever time of the day. And that's what's happened. And so our sales users are still in, and somebody's created more account and contact records at 7 minutes past midnight. Now that's a problem for a couple of reasons. It's a problem because the new account records are not going to be included in our backup. Why? Well, they weren't selected, right? They were created whilst the previous selection was being transferred over the network down to the machine. So that's a problem. But hey, good news, the contact records will be included because the selection for the contacts ran after they were created. But the problem that we have is we now have an inconsistent backup set because we've got contacts that don't actually have any corresponding account record in our backup. That's a problem. So what can we do about that? Well, we've got a few options. So we could kick all the users off the system like we did in the good old days. So anybody who's been in IT for more than about 10 years or 15 years will remember that we used to kick users off the system so that we could do a backup in peace. It's not really an option these days with Salesforce. We could run another backup after we've done with the first one to try and sweep up those records, and that's called an incremental backup. But whatever we need to do, the best thing we can do is to minimize the amount of time. If we can minimize the amount of time it takes to run the backup, we're minimizing the reduce of those collisions that we're talking about. So speed is really what is going to make our lives easier. So Siham, how do we think about speed?
Well, how do we think about speed? There are several ways to remediate or to go about to get that speed increased. The first one is to focus on the APIs. So as you all should know or know probably, there are several Salesforce APIs. So you have the REST, so bulk APIs, and they would back up certain amount of records. So for the SOAP and REST API, the average is 10 million records. So that would get recorded with an average speed of 1 million record per hours. It depends on the field type, the size, and so on. And for the bulk API, it can go with an average speed of over 10 million records per hour. That can be optimized. As you can see on the right hand side, you have orange dots that represent the bulk API, and you can see that there is an increase of record and of recording of backup, sorry, when you use the bulk plus, which is the PK chunking. So selecting the right API for the number of records that you need to back up is going to be the first thing that you need to do to be able to do a backup. And if you don't, when you have not too many records, that's fine. But when you have too much, you're going to come with a timeout or errors anyway. So it's not even going to work for you. The other thing that you can do to be to increase your to decrease your backup time is for the large data volume, it's actually parallelization. It's to take those different jobs, those different backup jobs, might they be rest, bulk, or SOAP, and so on, and it's actually launch several of those jobs at once. So by proceeding at your backup job with parallelization, for the REST API, you can see that you go from 1 million records per hour to 10 million records per hour. For the bulk API, you go from 10 to 350 million records per hour. So we didn't come up with those numbers just out of the blue. This is an average speed based on statistics that we've done on a 2 terabyte org. And that is how many how many jobs can be run simultaneously without hitting the governor limits, while leaving the company able to go to its day-to-day activity. And so everything is running, everything is fine, and you can still have great results.
So if you think about the very simple example I did, there was no parallelization there. We did the accounts and then we did the contacts. And so in a parallel situation, not only would we do the accounts and contacts conceivably at the same time, we would also split the extract of those account records into multiple jobs that run at the same time. And then likewise with the contact records, those can also run at the same time. And so parallelization is something that PK chunking helps you achieve to run the query much quicker. And then because you have multiple extracts over the network running at the same time, you're getting a lot more throughput of records out of Salesforce to where you need them, provided you've got the network bandwidth to do that. And we just put the geeky slides, the geeky faces on there because it's really interesting. You can do things to optimize it even further. Not only are you splitting records into groups, you can also choose which fields you take out of Salesforce in a particular job. So by separating, for example, the large text fields to come out by themselves, you can get even more performance. So it really is a really deeply fascinating subject, how to get the most out of these APIs and get that speed.
Yeah, it is indeed. It's one of the first onboarding steps with customer when we're doing backup. It's doing the analysis of their platform, and without looking at the data, because all the data is encrypted, we still get reports of the number of objects that they have, the size of their fields and all. And it's an art form to know like how to split those data to be able to create like a speedy data model, and how to improve that backup along the way. So the first time around, we might have a certain average. We just want to make sure that everything is captured, and as we process those data, we tend to make them to capture them more and more quickly. So it's
that's the
quite
backup.
impressive.
So
Yes.
when you tell us, Sivan, once we've got that wonderful data that's going to protect us, what are we going to do with that if we need it?
Well, what you're going to do with that, it's a couple of things, but now we're just going to look into the restore side of that backup. So let's look at the restore and large data volume. So why would you restore Salesforce data, first of all? Okay. It could be for security reasons. You need to recover a subset of data that has been corrupted. Perhaps you're into a situation of release management. You need to initialize a training environment, or you need to automatically transport data or metadata across Salesforce environment. You need to initialize a sandbox for to put some set of data, to do some testing, or after a refresh. And that's an important point. After the refresh, think about your full sandbox and how often you would be able to refresh it in normal time. And imagine that you would like to refresh it more than that allowed time. What would you do if you wouldn't have a restore system that allow you to back up and restore? You would have to wait that period of time. Lastly, in the release management, you might want to prepare or verify the training environment, or do a rollback strategy. And then finally, it's often forgotten, but it's very true nowadays. There are the merger and acquisition. So many big companies absorbs smaller companies, and so on. So you might need to copy an org or split an org during that process.
So just like I was saying at the beginning with, the dramatic disasters and the everyday disasters, it doesn't even need to be a disaster. There's so many applications for a copy of your data, that, having that really gives you a lot of power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so now let's look at two important definitions before we go on. Those two notion of RPO and RTO. You really need to wrap your head around those two, and it's going to help for the rest. So recovery point objective is the measure of how frequently you take backup. And the recovery time objective is the amount of downtime, a business can tolerate. So when you're working on a business continuity plan, there are two critical questions you need to ask yourself. One is about the backup. Okay, how much data can you really afford to lose at one point? So that will, if you answer this question, you will know what should be your backup frequency. Okay, is it once a week? Is it a couple of times a day? Do you need to do incremental for critical business data, and so on? So you need to answer that question first. And then the second is about restoration. How much downtime can you afford to have? If your system is down, how long can you really wait before the system goes back up? So once you have answered those two questions, and that ties around the RTO and the RPO, then you can prepare your backup and restore strategy. So this is the beginning of that reflection. So now what you need to look at here is, well, first, it's this data model, which is not a crazy Salesforce data model. Is just a data model where you know that you have parent and children relationship on an org, and even on a simple org, on a new org, you're going to have a quite complex parent to child relationship. So you need to ask yourself, like, do you have an efficient restore solution? Are your backup model allowing you for a quick recovery? When you're going to recover, would you have to restore this master-child or parent-child relationship? Would you have to do it manually, or would you have an automated system to do it for you? So what is important for you to do is to run regular audit, make sure that everything is in place, and that all the system is as optimized as possible. And this is what we're going to explore now, is how can you optimize your systems, what are the best practice and the recommendation to be restore ready. So you need to, first of all, assess your data quality from the beginning. You need to make sure that your code is clean. Okay, so nothing that shouldn't be hard coded should be in there, like Salesforce IDs, for instance. Backing up is the easy part, especially if you take everything at once and you're not looking at the quality of your data. It's easy to just capture, easy, quote unquote, there is the challenge of, of volume and so on, but still it's the easy part. Restore readiness is critical. You need to also keep in mind that large data volume bring additional challenges, and you need to see, simply like Matt mentioned before, will your data be ready to go through data loader? If it goes through data loader, then it will usually be able to go through a more sophisticated restore process. So here we've listed with Matt a couple of tips to avoid some common restoration pitfalls. So I'm going to take the two first ones, and I'm going to let Matt do the last two. So don't solely rely on Salesforce IDs in your legacy. Okay, the pitfalls are that Salesforce IDs will change during the restoration process. So we recommend that you use external IDs on your record prior to the restoration process. Then we recommend that you avoid circular references when possible, because how can you create records if the reference does not exist? In what order are you going to restore them? So we recommend to balance app performance and convenience as well with robustness. So Matt, what's your thoughts on the next two?
On the restoring what you need?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, this really is kind of getting away from anybody who's come from a sort of an on-prem historical mindset. Maybe it's SQL Server, maybe it was some kind of IBM DB2, where you would just take a snapshot of the data and then put a snapshot of the data back. That's not the situation when it comes to Salesforce. So being much more selective about what it is that needs to go back. So looking at the business requirements ahead of time to help you understand what's the information that the business needs to get back immediately, and then what can be recovered later. So that really ties in with the circular references as well, because when you're restoring things, it might be you're not able to restore an entire record in one go. It may take several passes, particularly if you've got different lookup relationships which are ultimately in a circle. You'll need to put that record back together in pieces, not all at once. And then other things that can be regenerated or perhaps can be, referred to elsewhere, things like field history, things like sharing records, which can be recalculated. So when you do your restore, you can pause the sharing recalculation, and then once the restore is completed, you can let that go, so that you can let people back in. And then the last thing really is very much around the business rather than the technology, which is you need to avoid any delays or any unnecessary delays in making a decision what to do. So when there is some kind of an incident, you need to be able to very clearly identify what has happened, and therefore take the appropriate action, because all the time that passes, you may be compounding the damage. And this is very much, the examples where, if we go back to the beginning, where Salesforce has had a couple of incidents in its long history, they've really been, did they do the right thing initially? And did they do it quick enough? And that's the challenge for anybody who's looking to do a restore under pressure, is to have a plan and be able to come to a decision as quickly as possible.
And I'm just going to jump, or to go on that word that you just use, pressure. When you're in a restore situation, usually you are under that pressure. You don't, I mean, sure, we're all like seasoned professionals, so like you're not going to crumble under that pressure. You are going to make some smart decisions, but still, it's good to be prepared and to make those decisions ahead of time, and to have this this recovery plan ready. So now the next section here is restore. Is it equal to data transformation? Question mark. So why are we asking ourselves this? Well, let's take the following example of restoring a masterpiece. So this masterpiece, as like everybody knows, the Mona Lisa smile, so has been restored after severe damages. So no matter how good the restoration goes, it might appear close to the original, especially for untrained eye. But for again, for a professional or for someone that knows what they're looking for, they will notice some differences. And those differences are due to micro alteration. Salesforce data is also transformed during the restoration process, and it creates an asymmetry between the backup version and the restored version of the data. So the main question to address in the process are how to measure the amount of transformation, how to minimize it as much as possible and stay as close to the original as possible, and what is the degree of transformation you should allow to tolerate. You should allow during your restoration, because if it's if it doesn't bother anything in your business, you could let it slide, you could let the transformation happen. But if it's going to fundamentally change your data, then that cannot happen. So before we answer those questions, let's review why and how data is transformed through an example.
So let me just jump in with a couple of examples while you bring that slide up, Siham, so
Sure.
that people can get their heads around it. So I mean,
Mhm.
again, this comes from my experience when I joined the company, because it's so obvious when I tell you, but you don't really think about it before this, right? So in the time between you taking a backup, maybe it was last week, what have your admins and consultants been doing? They've been customizing Salesforce, so the metadata has changed as well. Now, if you took a copy of the metadata, that's good, but you've still got to now restore your data into the new metadata structure. So maybe a formula field changed, and so the result's going to be different. And that's like the example Siham's talking about. It might be that you've got a field that's been added or a field that's been removed. What are you going to do in those situations?
Yes, all good and valid examples there. So here, to follow on with your examples, Matt, we have a record, a case record from a backup, and then the same case record after the restore. The legend at the bottom will show you that there is 100% match in green for the subject line. The orange show you data that are present but different, such as the ID, the case number, the created date, and all, because all of that is automatically changed by Salesforce. And the one in red are missing data. Okay, so they might be, for example, for the new formula field, the formula cross object that was created since the backup, so it's not going to be present in the backup, but it's going to be after the restore. So how do you handle that? Do you want to go back to do you want to skip those, and should you skip them, and so on? So, and then the last one here, the text field was deleted since the backup. So it's the other way around. This time around, you had the data that you had deleted on your production environment, and now you need to do a restoration. Does it mean that all the hard work that you've done, or that you've done, like working with this live data, is going to go back to its original state? So all those transformation type that we have counted down to 5 just for one single record can be avoided. You can bypass all of those, pun intended. So what are those strategy to avoid and that data transformation? So first, like, let's look a record from the backup and what can get it transformed. So by design, Salesforce may transform your data during the restore process. The ID, the auto number, the audit field, and so on. So we've talked about it already. Then you have your own customization, the workflow, the Apex trigger, the validation rule that you will create. It may also add data transformation. And so all of that, it's going to overall create a scope of transformation. So Now, what can you do to minimize that? It's pre-processing and post-processing steps that we have added in the schematic here in green. So the pre processing tips is and that's why I was playing with the word bypass, is to actually avoid bypass, create a bypass strategy for all those workflow, those triggers, those validation rules. You can put it on the user level of any solution that will deal with the restoration process, and you will create that bypass strategy that would actually greatly minimize the transformation. Now, another like, how are you going to evaluate the success of your restore process is actually through testing after restoration. So we tend to say that testing is not failing. It's actually a necessary step to do, and you will be able to measure the success of your transformation through that. If you follow, the different tips that have been given, you would see that you would greatly minimize the transformation. So, for example, some of the tips that you can do and that are relevant to this case is, for example, activate the creating audit field features, so you will be able to override the audit field in certain case. You can minimize transformation on auto number, so you can switch auto number field type to text field and then switch it back after the restore. You can, like I said before, create the bypass strategy for your workflow and trigger. You can prevent validation rule from blocking your restore process by deactivate them, but you can also put them into your bypass strategy. So all of those different things will actually help you to reduce the transformation. So where we had the example just before, where most of it was in either missing or present but different, now you see that over 80% of the case is now in green, and that was after applying all those different tips and tricks.
And just to say,
Mm-hmm.
those of you who have done a data migration project, you might recognize a lot of these things, because really you're using exactly the same techniques as you would for a data migration project when you're doing a restore. You're taking control of pre-processing and post-processing that data, rather than just let Salesforce automations run, rather than let the processes run and the triggers run. You're going to take control of that, because it's going to give you better performance and it's going to give you better accuracy, as Siham has demonstrated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I really love doing webinars with you, Matt, because you're always throwing at me the word that I need for the next the next section, which
You
is
have a better accent
performance.
to me, so
So
I can't. Yeah,
you
exactly.
you are the perfect webinar mate. So now let's talk about monitoring those governor limits. So as you may know, Salesforce has about 19 different governor limits. It's not going to be, we're not going to ask you to name all of those during the quiz, don't worry, so you can relax. But still, let's talk about governor limits, and let's talk about some of them, and why is it important, especially when we're talking about performance. So governor limits are run on multi-tenant environment, which means that resources are shared with other companies on the Salesforce platform. So everybody that works with Salesforce knows that. Everybody knows the analogy of, a company being an org, and being like an apartment in a building, and the building being like the different Salesforce data centers and so on. So those limits are in place to ensure that all the company using Salesforce architecture abide by certain rules and don't let their codes or process monopolize the shared resources. So those governor limits are used, and there is caps enforced by Salesforce to ensure efficient processing. So based on the data volume that you have, the number of users, and the contract that you have with Salesforce, you're going to have a certain allowance of governor limits usage. Of governor limits usage. So they allow for multiple users on the platform without impeding performance. So how can you or why should you anticipate those governor limits? So it will control your limits to, it will help you to control your limits to prevent system outage. So for example, if you know that for your REST APIs, your limit is at 80,000, and you see here in the predictive analytic that today you reached the 60K, but if you go with that trend, you have the little dots telling you that you will go over your limits in a couple of months' time. You can already anticipate by either reducing your usage, being smarter about it, or change your strategy, or getting more like increase your governor limits to like with Salesforce. But you need to have visibility on that. You can't make those decisions if you don't have the metrics. It will also help you predict the capacity needs. So maybe you need to get more users, maybe you need to get more volume, more data storage, and so on. As an administrator, and I'm sure that Matt can vouch for this, it can be strategic about your capacity management and capacity planning. And it will help you balance the system availability and with pragmatic resource planning. So how can you monitor those? So they are, so it's the schematic we're showing you now. They're called analytics, and it's from an Odaseva solution. We just present what we know best, but it will help you to see if you're close to your Salesforce governor limits, like how the records are trending per object, how much more data could your org have in 1 year. So those are just like a couple of examples of what you could see from those different dashboards. Okay, it's all about anticipation, about being alerted, about knowing what's going on, and about making sure that everything is running smoothly. So as you know, the IT teams in every company are the unsung heroes. We just realize that something is wrong when something is wrong, but otherwise 99.9% of the time it's smooth sailing, and it's because of the great staff, but also because of the smart decisions they have using the right tools to assist them. So now the best time, I hope that you've all been following, it's quiz time. So here is the quiz link. I'm going to actually send the link. Oh, it's already sent by Matthew. Perfect. I told you you're perfect. You're perfect.
I followed your lead from last time, you see.
So I stopped the sharing. Now it's going to go on Matt's screen, and he's going to be leading the quiz.
Okay, I'll just give people time to get logged in there, because we know how it's everybody's fingers and thumbs. I was fingers and thumbs with the mentee. So yeah, so we're going to do a quick quiz now. Everything we've shown you, everything we've talked about, is all standard Salesforce APIs. It's all standard Salesforce techniques many of you might recognize, but I hope you've got an idea of just how involved it really gets if you want to take the management of the data, the backup and the restore, and the data copies for your sandbox. If you want to take that seriously, it does get very, very involved. So that's the reason we have a product for it. But hopefully these tips have been useful, and like I say, when I joined the company, they certainly opened my eyes. So we're going to do a quiz, 10 questions. I'll just give like 10 more seconds while I waffle a little bit more for people. Are you seeing the screen okay?
Yes, we can see your screen.
So if you've got a mobile device and you want to use the QR code, go ahead. It works great on the desktop as well. When you're clicking the answers, just click the text, don't just click the big button. All right, is everybody ready? Okay, and those of you who noted down some numbers earlier, you might be in a good shape. Okay, so we're going to start off with the speed of API. So if you've noted those down, you could be in a good situation. So here we go. Let's see how we're doing. Okay, so the first question is, what's the average speed of the REST API? Is it 10,000 records an hour, 250,000, 100,000, or 1,000,000 records per hour? So that's the REST API. And don't forget to click the text of the answer that you have. Let's see how we did. A couple of seconds left. Okay, good job, Fergal. You were fastest with the right answer. 11 people got the right answer. Yes, it is 1,000,000 records an hour. Now, what about the SOAP API? SOAP API. What's the average speed of the SOAP API? 10,000, 250,000, 100,000, about the same as the REST API. Draw your attention to the slightly non-quantitative answer there. A few more seconds. Let's see how we did. Plenty of time. Made up your minds? Here we go. Yes, it is about the same as the REST API. There's not really a lot of difference between it. If you've got people who are religious about SOAP versus REST, it doesn't really make that much difference at the end of the day. So well done, Irina, for being the fastest with that one. Now, what about the bulk API? What's the average speed of the bulk API? So it's just the standard bulk API, 250,000 records an hour, 10 million records an hour, 1 million, or 100 million. What do we all think? Tick, 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 tick. These are the easy ones. We'll get on to the hard ones in a minute. Last couple of seconds. It is 10 million records an hour. Oh, everybody's been paying attention, Siham. That's very good news. Well done.
I know, I'm super happy with that.
Table. Now then, what about something we didn't talk about in a lot of detail? Let's test those of you who are super smart. The Salesforce bulk API with PK chunking. What is your answer? What is PK chunking? Is it going to be 2 times faster than SOAP? Is it going to be faster than the bulk API? Or is it going to be the consultant answer, which is it depends? Any consultants in the room? Let's see. Oh, we foxed you with that one. It is a consultant answer. It does depend, because the PK chunking is going to help you in optimizing the query that gets run and improving that speed. So sometimes it works better, sometimes it doesn't. So 7 of you got that right. Let's move on now to RPO and RTO. Do you remember what RPO and RTO stands for when Siham told us? Let's see with this question. So what's the recovery point objective for a customer who's decided to use a full copy sandbox to do their backups? Believe it or not, some people do this. It's a great way. Take a little snapshot. What's the downside? Well, do you have an RPO of 4 hours, 24 hours, 7 days, or a whopping 29 days? Hang on a minute, that number sounds a little bit familiar. It is 29 days, because RPO is how frequently you can take a backup. And with a full copy sandbox, you can only refresh it once a month. So that's going to be all you can do. Now, what about the recovery time objective? What's the recovery time objective for, let's say, an imaginary standard customer? Slightly imprecise? Slightly imprecise question? Maybe it's a slightly imprecise answer. Is it 1 second, 1 hour, 4 hours, which is the same as Salesforce, by the way, or is it defined by the business requirements? An RTO is the amount of time you can afford to be down, which of course is defined by the business requirements. What wonderful consultants and admins you all are. It's absolutely right.
Irina is really in the game, but Nasruddin is not far behind. So
I think this is the smartest audience we've had.
Yeah, they're on fire, all of them. But there are a couple of gifts to be won, so get all involved.
Okay, let's do a little bit. 4 questions on Restore. So data transformation on restore. Which of these things can cause data transformation on a restore? So validation rules, flow triggers, apex triggers, or B and C, which is flow triggers or apex triggers. What are the things that can transform the data during a restore when we're writing it back to Salesforce? Last couple of seconds. Yes, it is. It is flow triggers or apex triggers, any of that kind of automation. Validation rules are significant when we're doing a restore, but they're not going to alter that data, but they might prevent the record being allowed to be updated. Okay, a couple of questions to go. Let's talk now about performing a restore. What are the key differences? Oh, sorry, that's not the one. What are the automations that we should disable to help restore transformations? So what automations should we disable? Don't worry about it. Salesforce does it. Only the validation rules, only the apex triggers, or everything. All of our stuff needs to be disabled. And don't forget the integrations. It is anything that could affect our data. So turning off integrations as well, which could be running whilst you're trying to do a restore, also very important. Okay, this is the last two questions. So key differences between preparing a Salesforce to receive a data migration and a data restore. So what's the difference between doing a data migration project and a data restore? None? More preparation needed for a data migration? More preparation needed for a data restore? Or data restore is auto-magical and data migration is not? What do you think about that one? Well, the correct answer was A. There isn't really any difference between them. They are very, 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 very similar. I think if you're trying to do a restore, you're often got the benefit, the additional burden of time pressure. Okay, last question, and then we shall see how our order has done. So what's the first thing you should do after your Salesforce data restore has completed? We hope successfully. Should you do nothing? Should you hug a loved one? Should you set the automation and configuration back to its original state? Or should you watch a movie about pandas? I think the last time I did a restore, I wanted to watch a movie about pandas and hug a loved one. But really what you need to do is set the automation and configuration back. So that's our 10 questions. Let's see how we did. Okay, our winners are Irina, Nasruddin, I'm not even going to pronounce number 3, you know who you are, and Barry. So we have 4 winners. So I have your email addresses logged in here, and I will just double check that I have them. And
the number 3 is بصحتك. I know how to read that.
Oh, you can read Leet Speak, can you?
I can read that. I can read that. I'm that good. Okay. Well, congratulations to all of you. So what have they won, Matt?
Oh, you know what I did? I stopped sharing.
I know you stopped we kept that like it's the best part. We're not gonna go through the last slides for the takeaway points. We just the slides are going to be shared, and we went over time anyways. But congratulations to all.
The prize is, yes, we have
all of the winners.
We have 4 €50 certificates to the European Trailhead store. So for you top 4 winners there, we will get the details out to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for your participation, and don't hesitate to send us emails with questions if you have questions.